Hello and welcome to another LeetCode problem. We're going to be continuing on with the JavaScript challenge, and today we're going to be doing problem number 2622, cache with time limit. So in this function, you need to write a class that allows getting and setting key value pairs. However, a time until expiration is associated with the key. And so you have a set where you take a key, a value, and a duration, and once the duration has elapsed, the key should be inaccessible. The method should return true if some unexpired key already exists and false otherwise. And the value and the duration should be overridden if the key already exists. Then we have a get, which should find a key if it's there, otherwise return -1, and count returns the number of unexpired keys. So in a normal dictionary, you have something like key value, right? But now we actually need to do something else, and by that we need to have a reset, right? And so we actually need to have a reset. So the reason we need to have a reset is because we're going to be calling setTimeout to get rid of the key. And so I'm going to show you how that's going to look, right? So essentially we're going to have a key, we're going to have a value, and then it'll have some duration. And so what we can just say is like, let's call setTimeout and then give it a function which will delete the key. So let's just say delete key here, and that's going to be some time. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to make sure to have this reset, because in order to clear the timeout, you need to save that setTimeout's value to something else. So this will be like reset here. Let's make it actually smaller, like reset equals like this. And so we can store this variable, and then what's going to happen is, let's say a key is meant to be deleted and we update the key. We need to actually update the reset duration, but setTimeout already has been called to delete the key, so we need to reset this setTimeout. We need to get rid of it, and then we need to put in a new setTimeout. So that's essentially how our flow is going to be. We're going to put in a key and a value, and then we're going to call setTimeout to delete it. And then if it's updated, we are going to get rid of this setTimeout and put in a new setTimeout. And so we can use a clearTimeout to get rid of the setTimeout, and the clearTimeout takes the value that setTimeout returns. So you need to say something equals setTimeout, and then you can clear that timeout if you want to in the future. And so instead of storing a key value pair, like I said, we're going to have a key, and we're actually going to have an object that's going to have two things. So it's going to have a value, call that val, and a reset, which is what you need to use to clear the setTimeout that's going to actually delete the key, right? And so I think now we have enough to start writing this. And so what we need to do is we need to, first of all, we can just say like, we can have some kind of result. So what we need is the set function needs to return a result that tells you if it's actually going to be here, if the object is actually in this cache. Also, we do need to make a cache, so let's do that. So we can just say like this dot cache. We're going to make a cache here. And this is the same, this prototype thing is the same thing as a class-based way. So you could do it like this, or you could do it class-based, doesn't really matter. And then we're gonna have this dot keys, and we're gonna say the number of keys is gonna start at 0. You could honestly not even need this dot keys. What you could do is for the count, you can honestly just like in Python, you can just take the length of the keys array in the cache and just return that, and that's how many keys we have. So that works as well. But we're gonna do it this way. Okay. And so what we need to do is we need to have a result. So we're going to say, let's just make it false for now. Now we need to actually check if this cache has this key. And so by doing that, we can do something like this. So if this dot cache, so we're going to use has own property. I think that's like the cleanest way of doing it. You could do some other things, but I think this is like the best way to check, and this is going to ensure the least amount of mistakes. So if this cache has a key, what are we doing? Well, we're going to want to clear the timeout of the key to get deleted before, right? Like if it already has the key, we need to clear the old timeouts. That's what it says, right? The value and the duration should be overridden. So we're going to override the duration by clearing the old timeout, and then we're going to have a new setTimeout. So essentially, if there is a key, we're going to clear timeout we're going to clear timeout for it not to get deleted. So we're this dot cache key, and then it's going to have a reset. We're going to clear that, and then we're going to say let's make the result equal true. And the reason I structured it like this is so that basically what would happen now is we can set result equal to true, and then the code down here is going to be the same, the same as if the key wasn't in there at all. We're just clearing up the old key essentially. And so now if this code doesn't execute, then we can just return a result, and that's going to be false. It's a little bit cleaner, a little bit better structured by having the result up there. Okay, so now we're going to have an else case, right? And so what's our else case? Pretty straightforward. We're just going to put the key in. And so here, we're going to put in the key. And remember, we're going to have an object for the key. We're not going to have just like key equals value. We're going to have a key equals object, or stored here is going to be an object. We're going to increment this dot keys because we just put in a new key. And so that's also why you need this else case, because we're going to put in a new object if it's not in there, and we need to increment this keys. If we're replacing, then we're not incrementing these keys because we're pretty much taking out an object and putting in a new one in its place. Okay, so now this same code is going to be the same for any case. So what do we need to do? We actually need to set the value, right? And this will work regardless. So this dot cache key dot val equals that. This is a little tricky, like how this works, why you have to use this and this. So the reason you have to use bracket notation for keys, because key is actually an actual variable, where val is just string val essentially. So I think if you did something like this, this would work too. And so that's in between dot notation and the bracket notation, where dot notation, val is actually just string val, where key is actually a value turned into a string. Okay, so now we have that. Now we have to make a new setTimeout. All right, so it's going to be key, and then we're going to make a reset, and we're going to use this reset if we want to get rid of that setTimeout in the future. So setTimeout, and I will explain one more thing about the setTimeout that's kind of cool as well. So let me just write it first. So what do we need to do in the setTimeout? We actually need to delete. We need to delete this key in the cache, right? And so the way to do that would be like this: delete this dot cache, and then we need to give it the key. We need to decrement the keys. And then we also need to give setTimeout a duration. And so for the duration, that's just going to be this duration here that we passed in earlier. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Now we're going to return the result. And so let me talk about the setTimeout really quick. So the way setTimeout works, the way it knows what this is in setTimeout setTimeout is actually asynchronous. And so when you do this, it'll be asynchronous. So the way it works for an arrow function is that this in the arrow function is gonna reference to where it was called from. And because we called setTimeout in this time limited cache, this is going to be actually time limited cache. So if you were to not write an arrow function, if you were to just make a normal function, it wouldn't know what this is. And so you need to either make a bound function that like tells it what a this is, or you need to make another variable and say, let's make it equal to this, and let's actually pass it in here. You know, like you would pass in a variable called whatever is equal to this. But because we use the arrow function, it's gonna maintain its bind, because in the arrow function, bind is the parent. So you do need to be careful with arrow functions where you don't want the bind to be the parent. You don't want to use the arrow function where you actually have this that means something else. And so that's the difference between an arrow function this and a normal function this. Is the arrow function is just where it was called from, and the normal function is actually like whatever object you're using. So that's going to be the difference. And that's why the arrow function does work like this, but if you were to write a normal function, it wouldn't. Okay, so we're decrementing the keys. We're making a new setTimeout. So what are we essentially doing? Let's just go over this one more time. So if the cache has the item, we want to clear timeout. We want to clear the old timeout, and we want to say result is true because we did find the item, right? Essentially. Right, so you could see the method should return true if the key exists and false otherwise. So we're saying it already exists. Let's make our result true. Otherwise, let's just make a brand new object and increment the keys. Because if we replace, we're not incrementing the keys. We're just replacing one object by another. So that's not a replacement. And then regardless of either one of these, we're going to change the value. We're going to put it in a new setTimeout, and we are going to return. Okay, so now the rest of these methods are a lot more straightforward. They're a lot easier once you figure out how this set works. Like the set is the bulk of the code. So in the get, it's pretty easy. We just try to find it, right? So we can do the same thing. So we can just say return this right here, right? This dot cache has own property key, and it either does or it doesn't. If it does, let's return the value. So it's going to be this dot cache. And yeah, I would encourage you to like try to understand what this means, like why I wrote it like this, because once again, I'll explain it. The key here is actually a value that gets turned into a string, where val is literally this, essentially. So if you have a value, you're going to want to put it in brackets, and if you just have a string, you can use dot notation. And so what are we doing? So if it does have the value, then we're going to return the value. Otherwise, we return -1. And so also try to get used to this kind of format with the question mark. I think it's like a good practice. I think it's called a ternary operator in JavaScript. And this is in pretty much every other language, and there's a Python equivalent, right? It's just a little bit different. So it's like return x if x else y. This is like the same thing. So it just looks a little bit different in Python. Okay. And so the count of non-expired keys, like I said, you could do it one of two ways. We could have technically not needed any of these keys and it would still work, but we do have the keys. So without the keys, what you can do is you can just say, I think it's like object.keys of whatever this is. So like, I think it's like this, object.keys of this.cache. And this will just take the number of keys in this.cache, it'll turn it into an array, and then you can just return something.length. Like that will work as well. But now that we actually have a variable for it, we can just return this.keys. And so yeah, so the count and the get are pretty straightforward, and this is the real function that's like the meat of it, where you have to understand that when you set timeout, how do we get rid of that set timeout, how to work with async, and then what we actually need to store that we don't want to store just like a value. We want to store an object with multiple things, right? We want to store, and the reason you want to store an object here is because if you store a value, you need to, I mean, the other way to do this actually would be like this. You could store an array, and so you could just have an array of value and reset. That would work as well. So either one of these is like the same thing. So those are the two ways you could do it. Either one's fine. Okay, now let's actually get rid of this and make it go back into an object. But yeah, I don't think there's like one's better than the other necessarily. Because also, by the way, an array is actually made using an object in JavaScript, so it's literally the same thing. Okay, let's try to run it. Okay, so it looks good, and it's pretty efficient. Honestly, I don't know how much I can judge the efficiency of these tests. It's like not a lot of tests, so I don't think that's a big deal. But hopefully you understood everything. So yeah, hopefully you understood how setTimeout works, how clearTimeout works, how hasOwnProperty works. By the way, I think you want to use hasOwnProperty instead of like in, or like if you use like if something is in this.cache, I think this is worse because I think it like checks up the prototype chain or something. So it might not necessarily be in there. You're just gonna have more bugs. So I think hasOwnProperty is like the best way. I think there's also like hasOwn, but these are the best ways of getting like a clean, is it actually in there or am I screwing something up? Okay, so it's actually gonna be it for this problem. Hopefully you liked it, and if you did, then like the video. And I will see you in the next problem tomorrow. So thanks for watching, and see you.